Thank you for joining. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce Naira, who will be providing Spanish interpretation of this event.
Hola, buenas noches a todos. Mi nombre es Naira Pacheco y yo seré su intérprete para esta noche. Buen Vecino mantiene un compromiso para proveer servicios y educación en varios idiomas y por ese motivo esta reunión será interpretada simultáneamente en inglés y español. Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Naira Pacheco, and I will be your interpreter for tonight. Buen Vecino is committed to providing services and education in various languages. And so for that reason, this webinar will be interpreted from English to Spanish. En unos momentos, cuando termine de dar estas instrucciones, activaremos la función de interpretación. Si usted está en su computadora, verá aparecer un globo en la parte de abajo de su pantalla a la derecha. Y si está en su teléfono, va a haber 3 puntitos en la parte de abajo al lado derecho. Haga clic ahí y haga clic en interpretación de idiomas y seleccione el idioma en el que gusta escuchar este webinario. Si por algún motivo el audio original suena más fuerte que la voz del intérprete, en cualquier momento puede silenciar audio original. In just a minute after I finish giving these instructions, we will activate the interpretation feature. If you are on a computer, you will see a globe pop up on the bottom of the screen. If you are on the phone, you will see 3 dots on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Click on these and select the language you would like to listen to tonight's webinar in. If for some reason the original speaker sounds louder than the interpreter you are listening to, you can mute the original audio at any moment. Cuando llegue la sección de preguntas y respuestas, podrá escribir sus respuestas en el chat en español o en inglés, como usted guste. When we have the Q&A section come up, you will have the option to write your questions in the chat in English and Spanish as you would like. Muchas gracias y ahora podemos activar la función de interpretación. Thank you. We may now activate the interpretation feature.
Thank you, Naira. So just so everyone knows, this meeting will be recorded. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Cassandra. Thank you for coming to our second webinar in the Know Your Rights series with Buen, Vecino, RISE Simi Valley. This is Know Your Rights, Tenants' Rights During COVID-19, hosted by RISE, Buen, Vecino, Ventura County YIMBY Housing Rights Center, and CAUSE. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Cassandra. I'm the Director of Advocacy for RISE Simi Valley. And I'm also a lead with Ventura County YIMBY. We have Elena with Housing Rights Center and Maria with CAUSE. Just disclaimer, the information provided should not be considered legal advice. This webinar is for educational purposes only. Please keep in mind that this webinar is public and therefore you should not share any private information about your specific cause or situation. Elena and Maria will now share a presentation that they've prepared on housing during COVID-19.
I am happy to go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Ilana Eden. I am the Director of Outreach at the Housing Rights Center, and I am happy to be here today speaking to you all about tenants' rights during this time. Very important topic, and there's a lot of information to understand that I'm hoping to make a little bit easier tonight. Can everybody see my screen okay? Please share in the chat if you cannot. And I will go right ahead and get started if that's okay. We're going to dive right into this information. So just what I'm going to talk about briefly is, first of all, just introducing the Housing Rights Center so that you know who's talking to you and also what you may be able to get help from us, how you may be able to use our services. I'll talk about rent increases during this time. A really common question that we get is, can my rent be increased? and then eviction protections and the extension that you may have heard about of these protections. And then we can take some questions, move into causes presentation as well. So first of all, the Housing Rights Center. So we were founded in 1968. We have been around for some time, and we were founded along with the passage of the Fair Housing Act, which basically exists to protect civil rights in housing and to prohibit discrimination in housing. And we are actually the largest nonprofit in the nation that is dedicated to fair housing. We serve pretty much all of Los Angeles County and Ventura County. And all of our services are free and available in multiple languages. And I do want to say what those services are that you can get from us. So first of all, we have a hotline. Our Housing Rights Hotline is a number that you can call and speak to a trained housing counselor about whatever question you may have about whatever is going on in your housing situation, whether it's an issue with a landlord, repairs, rental payments, evictions, discrimination, disability accommodations, all of those things. You can see it on the screen, but I'll also read out the number. It is 1-800-477-5977. We have a TTY number for our deaf and hard of hearing clients, which is 213-201-0867. You can also email us, info@housingrightscenter.org, and you can actually also make an appointment if you would rather have a set time to talk to one of us at our website, housingrightscenter.org/help. If our counselors hear from someone that they are experiencing something that sounds like discrimination, we can actually investigate that and take that on as a case. And that includes accommodations in housing for tenants with disabilities, which we probably won't talk that much about today, but can be really useful and more protective than people know. We also can, and sometimes do, litigate cases if we're not able to find some other resolution. Most of the time we are. It's pretty rare that we need to litigate, but it does happen, and we can do it. We also provide outreach and education. That is my role, and I thank you for joining us today. And then we produce a listing of affordable housing opportunities in the Ventura area and the Los Angeles area. It's called Project Place. It's available currently online via email and on our website. So because our offices are closed right now during the pandemic, we are doing a lot of workshops like this one online. Every Monday, we do a live Q&A that answers questions that people have submitted. So it reflects what people are seeing right now. That's Mondays at 1 o'clock on Facebook. We also do workshops on fair housing rights, and I really recommend these. As I alluded to earlier, they are often, there are often more protections than people realize. So highly recommend joining us for one of these. And we give our updates on COVID-19 related protections every Friday. That's what you're going to hear from me this evening, but things continue to change, and it's always good to stay as up to date as possible. All right. So all of this being said, let's talk now about rent increases during this time. It is a really common question that I get: can my rent be increased right now? And the answer to that is probably, but there is a limit on how much it can be increased, on how big this increase can be. The whole state of California is currently in a declared state of emergency, and because of COVID, right? And what this means is that there are rules against price gouging or jacking up prices during an emergency. And this means that a landlord during this time cannot increase rent by more than 10% anywhere in the state. They also can't evict in order to then raise the rent by more than 10%. It's actually a misdemeanor, and this is in place indefinitely until the governor or the state legislature decides that we are no longer in a state of emergency and they lift the declaration, right? So everywhere in California, we should not be seeing rent increases over 10%. For certain properties throughout California, there may be an even stronger protection against large rent increases. This actually predates COVID. It is from the Tenant Protection Act, or AB 1482, you'll sometimes hear it called. And it applies to, as I mentioned, only certain types of properties. So here is what those properties are. First of all, apartment buildings that are over 15 years old. Multi-family buildings over 15 years old. Also, single-family homes or condos if they are owned by a corporation or someone in an LLC. I expect that a lot of people might not know if this applies to you, so always feel free to call us and we can try to help you figure it out. And lastly, duplexes if they are not occupied by the owner. So if the owner is not the other half of the duplex, then this is covered. And what you get if you are covered by the Tenant Protection Act is a cap, a limit on rent increases, which is currently 5.7%. Now, it varies every year and it's going to change over in April. It's based on the cost of living, but this is what it is currently. Now, we know that you will not be covered by this rent cap if your home is covered by local rent control, like perhaps less relevant in Ventura, but it has its own rules. Affordable housing, subsidized housing of any kind, programs, these have their own rules as well for rent increases, so they are not covered by this cap. And the same is true for group homes, dormitories. They are subject to their own rules. Even if you're not covered though, once the state of emergency ends, you will be entitled to extra notice for a large rent increase of over 10%. So again, during the state of emergency, we're not expecting to see those rent increases, and you should definitely contact us or someone else if you do. But once the emergency ends, they will be legal again, but you'll be entitled to more notice if it does happen to you. And that's really all that's in place in Ventura right now as far as rent increases. But there's a lot more to say about eviction protections, including evictions if you can't pay your rent, regardless of whether it has been increased or not. So I want to look at those next. So first of all, also under the Tenant Protection Act, there are protections for many types of evictions, pretty broad protections. They're called just cause eviction protections. And what this means is that the landlord must have a valid reason for the eviction. They must state a reason, and it must be a reason that is recognized by this law as a fair reason to evict. So a lot of those reasons are considered to be the fault of the tenant, and they're called at-fault evictions. So that would be things like a lease violation, property damage. Certainly criminal activity or criminal nuisance is always going to be on that list. There are also no-fault reasons where the tenant didn't do anything wrong, but the state is still considering the eviction to be fair. And this might be a situation like the owner wants to move in to their property, or they want to move a close family member in. In some cases, major renovations that would make the place uninhabitable can also be a basis for a no-fault eviction, which is still allowed. If you do receive an eviction, though, that is not your fault, right, under, legally speaking, then you're entitled to relocation assistance, and that assistance has to be equal to 1 month's rent, at least. We're going to talk in a minute about rental debt and rent that is owed during COVID-19, but I want to flag that if a landlord evicts a tenant for some other just cause reason, they will not be able to collect the rental debt, that any rent that you may have missed during COVID-19. So these protections, this limitation on the reasons for eviction, this is in place for everyone in California until August 1st. After August 1st, it's going to go back to being only these types of property, and actually I just listed them again here, that were covered by the Tenant Protection Act. So once again, that's the older apartment buildings, the houses owned by corporations, and the duplexes. And they will only kick in these protections after a certain length of tenancy. But again, these restrictions don't come into place until August. So for now, everyone in California has these protections on the left. Okay, moving on to the big question, what if you can't pay your rent because of COVID-19? So this law came about statewide called the COVID-19 Tenant, Homeowner, and Small Landlord Relief and Stabilization Act, also called AB 3088. We will be talking about the extension also, which is called SB 91. All of these different names, it's all the same thing, pretty much. And what it says is that a tenant has a defense against an eviction if they cannot pay their rent because of COVID-19. But it does say that the tenant has to take steps to opt in to these protections. They are not automatic. The tenant has to do certain things to be protected. And it's important to know that the tenant will have to repay the rent eventually. So this is not rent cancellation or rent forgiveness. What it really is a pathway to deferring or delaying your rental payments without being evicted for it. That's what the state has provided, essentially. So as an overview of what this pathway looks like, and I am going to go into more detail about each of these things, but here's the big picture. First of all, the tenant or the household, your finances must have been impacted by COVID-19. So the reason that you're not paying your rent must be related to COVID-19. Second, the tenant has to provide a certain form, a notice to the landlord that they are not paying and that they're invoking their protections. That form is called the Declaration of COVID-19 Related Financial Distress. It's a long name, but we are going to look at it, and I hope to show that it's not as complicated as it sounds. Third, very importantly, the tenant is going to have to start paying part of their rent. We'll talk more about this. And lastly, once again, you will have to repay the rent eventually. So now breaking each of these down. So first of all, just having a reason related to COVID-19. This is actually very broadly defined. These are just some common examples of what that reason could be. Perhaps lost income because workplaces closed, hours were cut, people were laid off. Perhaps childcare expenses due to COVID-19. Schools are closed, kids are at home, and some kind of care arrangement has to be made, right? That can be expensive. Medical expenses from COVID-19, whether it is the tenant themselves, someone that they are caring for, someone whose costs they have to incur. But most importantly, in my opinion, is the other category. So even if you do not see your personal situation reflected here and all of the millions of ways that we're all being impacted by this pandemic, you are probably covered under other. So I don't want people to stress about this too much, the reason. Next is the declaration. This is the form that the tenant should give to the landlord every month that they won't be able to pay their rent. Again, this is called the Declaration of COVID-19 Related Financial Distress. One really easy way to turn in this form is through a website, a tool called norent.org. And this is some of our other partners who are also nonprofits have put together this tool that lets you basically just fill in the blanks on this form, and then it will even mail the form for you. So I highly recommend this. It's free, it's easy, it's available in English and Spanish, and in my opinion, it's just the easiest way to do it. You don't have to do it through there. You can also visit the state's website, Housing is Key. You can download this form. You can check out all of the forms that are available to the landlords, or if there are landlords in this audience, you can find any notices and forms that you may need there. This Housing is Key is for everybody to find all the information they may need. But I do want to just go through this form briefly. I'm going to paraphrase walking through this form. So first of all, it just says, Dear Landlord. You fill in your landlord. This declaration letter is in regard to rent payment for the following months. Then, if you go on norent.org, you get to just check off every month that you are covering with this form. And you do want to cover every month. So if there are past months where you didn't pay rent, go ahead and just include them all on one form. But for every month going forward that you're going to be deferring rent, you do want to turn in this form as soon as possible. So there's no lapse, there's no gap in you being covered. Okay, so then it says, I am currently unable to pay my rent because, and it just lists all of the things that we just talked about. Loss of income, increased expenses, health impacts, childcare responsibilities, etc. And of course, other, don't forget other. Then it says here at number 7, even if I have received assistance, even if I have received disability or unemployment, or I have paid leave from work, it is still not enough and I still can't pay my rent. I declare, under penalty of perjury, I swear to the court that this is true. Signed, tenant. That's it. And again, you don't have to write this all out. You can just fill in the blanks going to norent.org or going to Housing is Key. So as I mentioned, you should turn this in every time that you need to defer rent. You can turn in one form for past rent. You can lump that together. And then as far as documentation, for any tenant who earns less than $100,000 per year, no documentation is required. You don't have to turn in any documentation of your finances or how you've been impacted by COVID-19. Just the form is enough. For tenants who make more than $100,000 per year, the landlord can request documentation, but they cannot require a certain type of documentation. So sometimes I hear from people whose landlords are requiring bank statements. Absolutely not. The tenant does not have to provide that. There's no requirement for what type of documentation the tenant turns in if they need to. If you don't need to, if you don't meet that requirement, you earn less than $100,000, it's still a good idea to hang on to any documentation that you might have, whether it's a text from your boss saying we've got no hours for you this week, this month, whatever. It's wise to hang on to it just in case, but it's not required to be turned in with this form. So now I want to talk about partial payments. And this has to do with some of the deadlines that were extended recently by SB 91. So, under this extension, tenants have until June 30th, 2021 to pay at least a quarter of the rent that was due since September 1st, 2020. So I'll just repeat that maybe in a different way. So, any rent that you may have deferred before September, last March through this past August, you did not have to pay any partial rent on that. Just turn in the form now, and you're covered for that. As of September 1st, some payments start accruing. So you don't have to pay this partial amount every month the way that you would pay rent. If you want to, you can pay it all at once, as long as all of the rent that has added up since September 1st through June 30th, a quarter of that amount is paid by June 30th. That makes sense? There are also new protections in SB 91, which say that a landlord should not apply someone's rent payment to their debt without permission. So if you're trying to pay your February 2021 rent, the landlord should not take that rent and say, actually, I'm counting this toward your debt that you missed in May 2020, and you still owe me February rent. They should not be doing that. You decide where your rent goes, and you can put it in a memo on the check or in the online payment form, get a receipt for cash, all of those things to make sure that you're just covering your bases, but you direct the payment. Also, a landlord cannot seize a security deposit to be used toward the debt while the tenant is living there. If you move out, that's a different story. Additionally, any rent that you may have missed, it should not be accruing late fees or interest. It should not be growing in any way. You only have to pay back the amount that you actually missed. They've also said that there should not be new fees on services. Basically, if a landlord wanted to impose a late fee on rent, but they weren't allowed to, so they tried to impose a fee somewhere else, right? That is being banned as well. The only flip side to this is that if a landlord reduces a service because of COVID-19, so maybe they close the pool or some common facility, they no longer have to lower rent when they do that. So that's just one circumstance. We do get questions about that sometimes. It's the flip side of the no added fees. All right, if you're still with me, how does this end? So the extension, SB 91, took us all the way to June 30th for the partial payments. And then as of July 1st, 2021, there will be no more deferral or delay of rent. No more declaration form, no more partial payments. It is full, normal rent payments as of July 2021. It's not until the next month, August 1st, 2021, this is the absolute earliest that any tenant is required to start paying back their debt. Not complete, but start. So if your landlord has been telling you that you need to be paying down your debt already, that is not correct. You do not have to start until August. And you do not have to complete paying your debt until the following August. So repayment begins August 1st, 2021. It ends August 31st, 2022, right? There's not a lot of requirements for within that time. If you can, if your landlord is amenable, it could be helpful to come up with a written agreement so that everybody's on the same page and a year and a half from now, you're not trying to remember what the other person said. But that's not always going to be possible, I know. And what's important to note is that if the tenant does not pay back this debt, right, instead of eviction, because the tenant has taken all these steps specifically to protect themselves from eviction over this rent, right? So if you don't pay it back, instead of eviction, the landlord can take you to small claims court. And this is new. These kinds of cases do not normally go to small claims court. They normally go to eviction court. And it's going to be different. And we're going to have to see how all of this plays out in court together. It's happening for the first time to all of us. But we at HRC and probably the county and the cities as well will be putting out more resources about small claims court once this date starts to get closer. But I do want to point out that, again, any rent that was protected by this law, so starting from last March through June 30th, right? any rent that you missed during that time period, if you followed these steps with the forms and the partial payments, you cannot be evicted for it. Instead, you can be taken to small claims court. So that is pretty much all that I have to say, but I wanted to also put up this slide, and I can send it out afterwards so you don't have to scramble to write it down, of legal aid resources in Ventura County. And it is so important. If you forget everything that I said today, please know that you should definitely get legal aid if you receive an eviction notice. It makes a huge difference to have legal aid versus not to have it in an eviction defense case. And there are places where you can get it for free. One of the reasons that it makes such a difference is that there are some strict timelines and some strict, bureaucratic requirements for how an eviction case goes. You have to fill out certain forms. You have to give it to the right person. You have to do it at the right time. You have to show up at the right date. And it can be confusing, and it's easy to get something wrong, and getting something wrong can really damage your case. So that is why, not to scare, but on the other hand, to provide this resource, I really recommend checking out legal aid as soon as you get any kind of notice. And also, you can always contact us. Not for legal aid, we cannot give you a lawyer. So if you get an eviction, please do get an attorney. But if you have any other questions, any other needs, we are more than happy to answer, help, do whatever we can. You can contact us any old way. Use our hotline, email, website, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We will answer you. We are here to answer your questions. Thank you all so much. I hope that was helpful. I'm sure there are some questions, but for the moment, I'm going to hand it over to Maria to share a bit about additional resources that she represents.
All right. All right, thank you so much. Yes, let me share my screen really quickly. So hello, y'all. My name is Maria Navarro. I am a policy advocate here at CAUSE. I've been working here for a couple of months now, and right now I'm just going to talk a little bit about this organization and who we are, okay? So a little overview or background about the organization. We're technically, our long acronym is the Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy. We were founded in 2001, and we were founded here in Ventura County, actually in Ventura, the city of Ventura, and we merged with Pueblo back in 2012. Now, Pueblo was a nonprofit organization working in the Santa Barbara region, specifically in Santa Maria. So CAUSE is a local grassroots nonprofit community organization, and we service 5 cities: Santa Paula, Oxnard, Ventura, Santa Barbara, and Santa Maria. Okay, our mission. So our mission in CAUSE is a base building organization committed to social, economic, and environmental justice for working class and immigrant communities in California's Central Coast. We build grassroots power through community organizing, leadership development, coalition building, civic engagement, policy research, and advocacy. So what I want to highlight here is that we're a grassroots organization. So everything that we do, we start from the bottom up. We listen to our community, what our marginalized people and community have had to deal with, and we build our policy based on that and our policy advocacy. Our issues that we work on mainly are immigrant rights, housing, environmental justice, workers' rights, voting rights, and investing in youth of color. We are fairly new in Ventura County on housing, So we're still starting that out. And right now, and I'll talk about this later, but we're working on some exciting campaigns in Oxnard. So how do we organize? We use the house meeting model. And I had a video here to show you all. It's 3 minutes. You can find it at our website at costnow.org, but I'll skip it right now. But basically the house meeting model, or it's a model that was actually popularized in the 1960s with Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez. And that is the model that we take on. We try to build community organization and empower people by going to the community and being out there, and then inviting them into our organization. And then once they're in our organization, they come to our meetings. And if they want to partake on what we do, then they become our leaders and our organizers. Oh. Sorry. So I wanted to highlight some recent victories. So in housing, we have been working a lot more, like for a longer period of time in Santa Barbara. So we campaigned Santa Barbara City Council to pass a no-fault eviction relocation assistance of 3 months rent. Now, like Alana said and explained so eloquently, you know, the Tenant Protection Act, which is the bill that covers all of California, it actually allows for one month's rent. But after a lot of effort and years of work, we actually had Santa Barbara increase that protection to 3 months rent. You know, this highlights the power of community organizing and the fact that we can make stronger protections for tenants in our areas by looking into small town politics, city council, or specifically city council, but in some cases, right, at the county level. That's the terrain where we like to work in. There's other larger organizations that work in the California terrain, so the Assembly and the Senate of California. However, we like to work in city council level because we can get these small wins, which are huge, which you know, impact a lot of people. So we're really committed to that. This actually happened at the end of last year in December, this victory. And so what are we working on in Ventura County? Right now, we're trying to pass rent control in Oxnard. So if you've been looking at our at any meetings in Oxnard City Council, you would know that tenants have come up and tried to lobby City Council to try and get rent control on the agenda. We finally did so. Right now, we're in the stage where we're trying to meet with our grassroots leaders to try and have their input to see if we could pass any legislation. We also want to get involved in spreading Know Your Rights literature. We try to do that a lot through Facebook, Instagram, and also in physical form. We actually go out and send mailers to people and sometimes leave it at their doorstep as well. General plans, these are coming up. Especially I know in Oxnard, everywhere in Ventura County, I think Camarillo is going through theirs as well. Thousand Oaks or Mer Park, I believe, is as well. So different cities have different general plans, and we're trying to get involved, at least in Oxnard and Ventura, as much as we can with these general plans. And just to have this little plug, you know, we're doing tomorrow a meeting about rent control. And so we're going to do, this is going to be in Spanish, and it's going to be for people who would like to get together. And we're going to ask the community basically, what type of rent control do you think suits the community best? And what type of protections would you like to see in Oxnard? So this is what the meeting is going to be about. And that'll be Friday, February 26th at 6 p.m. If you need more information, our organizer in Oxnard is Suleth, and her WhatsApp or her phone number is 805-330-1388. Okay. And so why should you get involved? I feel like a lot of people sometimes they kind of just want to try to get involved, but never have found like a venue to try to see how they can get involved. And, you know, COS tries to get people who are usually, you know, marginalized, people who have a lot of responsibility. Maybe they don't have a lot of time. We want you all to speak up because your experience matters. You get to develop your leadership skills. We have a young adult committee, a youth committee. So if anyone is interested in joining those spaces, please do so. Our youth committee is from 13 to basically when you graduate high school. Our young adult community is after high school, college ages up to like 25, 26. And, you know, our adult committee is for usually for those farm workers or people in our communities who really you know, feel like they've been left out, they've been left behind by our cities and our government. So, you know, this is a good time to engage your community, to take action, and to be kind of corny, be the change, right? And how do you contact us? Well, you could go to our Facebook or Instagram pages at COS805, that's our handle, or you can go to our website, cosnow.org. Or you can text Sulet at 805-330-1388. You could also email us at sulet@cosnow.org or maria@cosnow.org. But that will be the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Alana and Maria, thank you very much for your presentations. They were fantastic. Okay, so right now we're going to start the Q&A session. Remember that this is not a private forum, and any personal questions regarding a specific case should be directed towards practicing attorneys privately. So we do have one first question in the chat. Is a lot of us in Ventura are getting 60-day notices as landlords are selling homes. Are we not equally protected under the no fault evictions?
I'm happy to answer that. So it might help to understand a little bit better about this situation. So typically, just the sale of a home is not a just cause for eviction. So if the only thing that's happening is that the building is changing hands, ownership, that should not be a just cause for eviction. A possible exception to that is if this is perhaps if you live in someone's home or if you live in a back house of some type. In those cases, there is sometimes in the lease a clause that agrees to move if someone else purchases the home. So if you live in a single family home situation, check your lease if you have it. Otherwise, this should not be a just cause for eviction. What sometimes does happen is that the building will change hands to a new owner, and then the new owner will do something that might give them a just cause. So when your building is changing hands, when you know your building is being sold, in my opinion, it's a really good idea to get in touch with some tenant organizers and try to find out what the potential plans are. Talk to your neighbors on the property as well, and see, try to figure out what your options may be if you were to talk to the landlord, or what you can at least anticipate to happen. But again, just a sale is not a just cause for eviction.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Another question is either, I know you both had gone over it a little bit in the presentation, but I will do it as a collective question is, do you offer any legal services? If so, which ones?
did you want to?
Sure. So COS does not offer any legal services. We're more of a grassroots organization. We work with policy and policy change. However, we do not have the capacity right now to offer legal aid.
We offer some types of legal aid. So first of all, when you call our counselors, or if you hear from an outreach person like me, we are not attorneys and we are not giving legal advice on specific situations. So it's not a recommendation as to what you should do, but what you are getting is legal information, and we are trained to give legal information. If you come to us with a discrimination case, a case of a disability accommodation being denied, we do offer legal services in those cases. So if we were to take, if our case managers were not able to find some other resolution and we had to take it to court, that would be free. We would represent you for free. Again, it's pretty rare. It's more likely that we will find a solution outside of court, all of which will also be free. I wanted to add that we are moving into eviction defense, but we're not currently offering that service when people just come to us. So, I will obviously try to keep people posted if we're able to offer more in the way of eviction defense, but definitely we can offer referrals to some of the organizations that we put on the screen earlier.
Perfect. Thank you. Those are all the questions that we've had in the chat. If anyone has any others, please feel free to put them in the chat. If not, we can start wrapping up.
I would like to say something really quickly. I also forgot to mention in my PowerPoint slide, that there are other organizations, like I was saying, coalitions, statewide coalitions, that work with renters. And one of them is Tenants Together. We work with them a lot. And, they usually have really good Know Your Rights flyers and a lot of information that can help. They also do have a hotline. So I'm going to put their contact info in the chat as well.
Amazing.
I actually did want to answer another question. I'm not going to address any personal details, but there was the question that was basically about how does a just cause eviction work when there are also COVID-19 related protections in place. And basically this person was asking, what about SB 91? Does this impact the just cause eviction? And the answer is that they're basically separate. Just cause can be a lot of different things, and SB 91, AB 3088, whatever you call it, right? This relief, this protection is only about not paying rent. That's all that it covers. Nothing else is covered by this protection, the one where you turn in the form, you pay your partial rent, and then you repay the debt later. Everything else is just a question of whether it is considered a just cause or not. And some of these no-fault reasons that people have mentioned and that we've talked about today, like the owner moving in or moving their family in, these are valid reasons under just cause. I also saw a question about where you can find legal aid for landlord-tenant issues if you can't afford to hire a private attorney. And the slide that I shared at the end, and I'll just share it again. Almost all of these places are free. I think one or two of them might be donation-based, low cost, and some of them are provided by the county itself. So you can go to the court and do what's called self-help, where someone there can basically help you fill out a form without giving you, advice. But you can also go to these free clinics. They host clinics, and these places do deal with landlord-tenant issues. I did look that up before sharing them. So I think all of these, yeah. The exception here is the Ventura Center for Dispute Settlement, and that could be helpful in cases where you maybe don't want to go to court, but you need some mediation. So I just did want to flag that as well. And I'm happy to send the presentation, the full presentation, and also just this slide out so that people can access these resources. And I'll stop sharing it now.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's a question in here. I will read it as it is. We at the Santa Barbara Tenants Union have noticed that soft evictions happening where some landlords are displacing some long-term residents and replacing those units for often illegal short-term rentals. Any ideas on how to push back against this?
This is one for the organizers, I think.
Yeah. So Stanley, hi. But I think that the best way, at least the cost method to go about that, is to try to organize everyone who's being evicted, everyone who is facing the situation, and go to city council, talk to our representatives, and try to get some legislation passed. I know that in Santa Barbara, Airbnb and a lot of these short-term rentals are already illegal. So there might be some type of enforcement agency in place that we can try to access. If not, then, talk to your council member, especially if y'all have districts in Santa Barbara, which I'm not sure. The Santa Barbara City Council member who represents that district specifically. But yeah, if you want to get in contact with us, just shoot me an email. You can always email Frank as well, frank@costnow.org. Just take our name and then just slap costnow.org at the end. And that's how you'll get all of our emails. But yeah, that would be how I would at least go about doing this.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's all the questions for this evening. I'd like to thank everyone for coming to the second webinar of our Know Your Rights series. We do have 3 more webinars planned for all you, and we hope you all will join us in. Please do follow RISE and Vecino to keep up on the Know Your Rights series. RISE is at RISE Simi Valley on all socials, and Buen Vecino is at Buen Vecino on all socials. Coming up February 24th, we do have our labor rights, Know Your Rights presentation. March 10th, we will have protester rights. And March 24, we will have SB 54 rights. Thank you to our co-sponsors, Housing Rights Center. Alana, thank you very much for your presentation. Maria with Cause, thank you very much. Ventura County YIMBY, thank you very much. That'll conclude our presentation for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.